Hello, today I would like to talk about cheap games, and by that I just mean games that are priced very cheaply. Every one that I've written down here as a sort of example is somewhere under $10 US. And the game that sort of set off this whole discussion for me, or just sort of got me thinking on the topic, is Vampire Survivors. And if you've been in any sort of online gaming space recently, you've probably heard of it. This is an early access Steam game that is currently priced at, I think, $3 US. That's it. And it is blowing up to a massive degree. I think over 100,000 reviews, very positive reviews overall. Tons of streamers have picked up on it. And in general, it's just a fun time. A friend recommended it to me, tried it out the other day. It's great. It's really simple. All you have to do is move. All the attacks are automatic. And then you just stack power-ups on top of each other like Risk of Rain style. And it's really satisfying. This sort of spurred some more thought, I guess we could even sort of call it a sector, a tiny sector of the massive contemporary gaming space is cheap games. Games that are priced real small. They're almost always really small in scope as well. And as far as I can tell after some further thought, these types of games and this pricing approach is just a win-win all around. It's beneficial to devs, especially new or aspiring devs just kind of getting their feet wet. And it's also extremely beneficial to players because basically anyone can afford these games. They can try them out. They're more likely to be kinder to the games overall, I think, because they're not paying that much to get through the door. I just want to talk about that a little bit in sort of an unstructured way, and throughout I will be showing some game trailers for games that for me fit this mark perfectly, all under $10 and incredibly satisfying to play, in all different genres, different looks, different size teams, etc. So if you see one that you don't recognize, take a look. A big part of this, I think, is getting into the discussion of video game pricing in general, or just how to decide on a price point for something that you've made. And this is something that I've dealt with personally a couple of times, just because beyond the YouTube stuff and beyond my actual job, I write books. I've written a couple books. I'm always working on the next one. And there have been a couple moments where I had to be the one who decided what the price was going to be. And I don't know, maybe other creatives can relate to this, but I find that process really difficult because there's so many different factors to consider. On the one hand, you have the really practical stuff, like how much would people be willing to pay for something like this? And then you have the more abstract, like how much does it feel like this thing is worth based on the amount of work that I put into it behind the scenes, the amount of time that I spent on it. And then you also try to look at comparable products out there on the market and how they've performed and what they're priced at and whether that price feels right for your thing. And I have no doubt that a lot of this stuff is going through the minds of game devs who are getting ready to put something out, maybe even releasing their very first game, and they're just like, I don't know. Maybe you see games that seem somewhat similar, priced at like $15, $20. Some of those maybe didn't perform so well. And then over here you see the option of, what if I just price it real cheap, basically next to nothing? Well, on the one hand, that seems like a risk, because ultimately, the more that you price the thing, the more people that buy it, the more money you will make. That's simple enough. But at the same time, I think it's really important to have a more, accurate understanding of how buyers think about price, because they're on the other side of the fence. Obviously, they're not trying to get money for a product, they're trying to pay money for a product. As a result, they're probably going to be hesitant about buying anything that seems way too expensive. You know how we just talked about all those factors that are probably running through the head of someone trying to decide on the price for a product? Basically, none of that is really factoring into a buyer's consideration when they're thinking about a transaction. At least from my perspective, as someone who buys things and who even just buys a lot of games, I'm not really considering, how many people worked on this game behind the scenes? What's their previous work like? Does it seem like this is an accurate price for the work? No, I'm thinking, this costs X amount. Do I have that amount to spare? And does that cost line up with my interest in the game? If my interest is greater than sort of the value, the price, what that amount of money is worth to me elsewhere, I'll buy it. That's how it works out. And that's a huge part of why you get more stuff when it goes on sale, because it doesn't feel like as much of a risk. You're not throwing as much of your money at a product. And so if you hate it, you're not really in trouble. And this is where I think cheap games shine bright as a diamond, because there is inherently a lower risk. The buyer just won't be as hesitant. If it's only a couple bucks, even just word of mouth can set something completely ablaze. This is absolutely something that I think happened with Vampire Survivors. Awful name, by the way. So much word of mouth, whether virtual, through streamers or just a friend telling you to pick this thing up, which is exactly what happened to me. $3, I'm not even thinking about it. I'm there. It's done. It has been purchased on Steam. It is now in my library. No hesitation. The dev made some money, regardless of whether or not I like it. Here's the real kicker. As a buyer, as a player of games, there's always a chance that it's not going to click with me. Maybe it's just not my taste. Maybe it's sort of rough around the edges and I don't like that so much. Despite all the potential room for negativity, after buying any game, for any price, based on the price, whether it feels high or low to me, I am probably going to feel compelled to be much kinder, much more forgiving to a game that costs less. And this is sort of interesting because this is an argument that I get in response to some of my videos on specific games. More specifically, I get this a lot in response to videos I've made about games that have solo developers. So like Littlewood and Garden Story both have solo devs behind them. And people will say, hey, you shouldn't be too harsh about a game that just has one person behind the scenes. Like, obviously, they can't polish it until everything's perfect. That's just way too much to ask. Yes, that is true. And no, you shouldn't be as critical, I think, or as harsh of a game that has a solo dev or a small team as something with a massive team and tens of millions of dollars behind it. But, again, to the buyer, price is supposed to communicate value. Price is supposed to feel commensurate with the value that the game is delivering to the person who's paying that money. If it's priced at something like $15-20, and you can point to a million other games out there that have delivered so much more for the exact same price, what else are you going to do? That is ultimately the most important factor for a person buying a game. It certainly is the most important factor for me. If you're pricing a game below $10, even below $5, I will give you the world. I will forgive basically anything, and any enjoyment I get out of it, any extended playtime that I get out of that game, just feels like a bonus. It just feels like, oh, this is money that I might have spent on like a soda at the store. And instead, I get this lovely game that'll be in my collection hopefully forever. And this is the big reason why I think that cheap games that are also very small in scope are just probably the best possible option for aspiring game devs or first-time game devs, whatever, devs without a ton of resources behind them. Is this not the best possible way to try to break into the industry and just ship something in general and see what the response is like? I don't know. I just cannot imagine a better scenario. Like, I guess, sure, you could release a game for free and the expectations will be even lower. There's that. But here, even if you're just pricing it at a couple bucks, at least the dev is earning something for the work. They're earning something for the amount of time and work that they put into it. And hey, with something like Vampire Survivors, if it is sold hundreds of thousands, just tens of thousands of units even, that could probably even be more money than they would have made if they priced it a lot higher and very few people, or relatively few people, felt compelled to take the plunge. And then obviously on the buyer side of things, cheaper games are just great there too, because more people can get in, more people can have access to the game. And to be honest, like, I hate hearing conversations and arguments that try to tell me that everybody should be really satisfied that even AAA games are still priced at only $60. Like, if you can't afford that, like, just deal with it. They should be a lot more because inflation says that they should be a lot more. I plugged a number into an inflation calculator and it says it's worth, $150 in today's money or something like that. No, I really hate that argument because it's really, really deeply flawed. This is something that James Stephanie Sterling has pointed out before, and very few other people seem to mention in discussions about video game pricing and inflation, is that inflation doesn't exist in a vacuum. Cost to someone, the amount of money they have to fork over, is not relative to inflation. It is relative to how much money they have, how much money they're earning. And at least here in the US, wages have been stagnant for multiple decades at this point. And so the fact that anything is still rising because of inflation is a net loss. In fact, we've even seen in recent years that, we've had record gains, record increases to wages. Inflation still outpaces that. It still means that people are earning less, that the stuff they're earning is worth less in the overall economy. And again, here we are, cheap games solve everything. Even for someone who's earning very little money per month, a couple bucks gives them an opportunity to be involved in something, even in those really exciting early stages, like with something like Vampire Survivors. You can be part of the hype. You don't have to shell out $60 and hope that you can still pay the gas bills at the end of the month. No, you can just be involved. Another excellent aspect in terms of sort of the accessibility of cheap games is that partially because of their small scope, in most cases, you can run them on almost any hardware. You can run them on low-spec hardware. You might even be able to run them on a phone, tablet, etc. I'm seriously looking for downsides to this model, to this approach, and I just don't see them. I mean, let me know, I guess, if you can think of something that's like a huge detriment to cheap game pricing and small scope games. I don't see it right now. And this is one last point that I really want to touch on here, is that back on the side of the devs, back on the side of the creatives actually making the thing, and this is something that I can speak to personally, not in game dev, but in writing and other creative pursuits, there's certainly a temptation to do some big giant project that's really massive in scope and feels like it's just everything you can possibly do. Every idea gets thrown into there, and it's going to take a real long time to complete, but hey, if you finish it, maybe it'll be super successful. I've felt that temptation many times. I've had many projects like that I worked on for years and years and just felt like I don't have the motivation anymore, like I'm not getting any feedback. I have no idea whether this is any good. In contrast to that, you have the small scope creative project. Again, just yet another benefit. You're spending less time on the project overall to complete. You'll get feedback more quickly. If you need this kind of work to sustain you financially, you'll get a return on investment relatively quickly, as opposed to over a span of like 3 to 5 years. And hey, even a small thing can be appreciated really deeply by an audience. Like, it doesn't have to be the biggest game to be super impressive and enjoyable. And the example I would use here is A Short Hike. And this is something the developers talked about. I think it was in a GDC talk or something like that. He quit his big job and he was like, okay, I have some money. I'm going to work on this big, massive game with all these complicated systems, and it's going to be great, but it was going to take years and years. And he was losing motivation, losing steam. It just wasn't going to happen. It was starting to become a burden, and it was dragging everything down, and then the pressure was on because he didn't have the regular job anymore bringing in money. And over here on the side, he just had this other little environment, just this game space that felt really pleasant to run around in and just sort of relax in. He realized, oh, this is something that I could turn into a shorter experience. I could finish it relatively quickly, and the rewards of making the choice to focus on that project instead were enormous. That is a huge game. It has completely launched this dude's career to pretty incredible success, and so many people have just fallen in love with that game completely. They love the environment, they love the characters, they will return to it even though it is smaller in scope, doesn't have a huge amount of replay value in my opinion. You still can replay it just to be there, just to experience that space, just to experience someone's creativity and something that captures just this small moment in their career. But that's honestly the core of what I wanted to share here. It really does just seem like a win-win all around to do these games that are smaller in scope, that are priced relatively cheaply. So many more people can enjoy them, which also means more money for the developers behind the project. And so many of the games that I love happen to fall into this category. And so, hey, if you're a dev out there, maybe consider this option, something a bit smaller. And no, it's not guaranteed to be a success, but that's okay. At the very least, you'll learn a lot from the experience and probably get some feedback from players, and hopefully that feedback will be pretty kind, considering that the buyers didn't have to fork over a bunch of money to try it out in the first place. And for buyers, yeah, not every cheap game is going to be the best thing ever. There's a ton of shovelware on Steam and Switch and other storefronts. There's a ton of trash that's priced very low, but even in that scenario where you fork over just a couple bucks for something like that, you won't feel like it's going to break the bank. It's kind of worth the risk to see if something new and creative and different really clicks with you. And that's just one last thing I guess I could touch on, is that for developers, it's possible to take more risks with a smaller scale project like this. You're not using up a ton of resources to create it. You can try something different. You can try something creative, something that feels authentic to your vision, which is one of my biggest goals. That's one of the things that I want to promote more than anything with the channel, is just please try something new. Please try something that makes you excited as a creator. try something that will maybe speak to people that haven't felt seen, who haven't felt like they are getting what they want out of a lot of other creative experiences. But I'm really starting to ramble here. I will have to wind this down. But my gosh, thank you so much for sticking around for the whole thing. Please share any cheap games that you've really enjoyed. I think that would just be a lot of fun. And hey, some of these on screen, if you haven't tried them out, give them a shot. But that's all for now. Thanks for stopping by.